Hello and welcome to the Envoku Exchange. My name is Bruce. I'm head of strategy at Envoku, and I'm your host for this podcast, which is all about communication and connection. And today I'm very lucky to be joined by Mr. Adam Parry, arguably one of the most influential figures in the events industry, as I see it, co-founder of Event Industry News, Events Tech Live, and Event Sustainability Live. Something of a known face, I think it's fair to say. Adam, how are you doing? How do we find you this wintry December morning?
I am very well. For a rare day, we don't have any rain in Manchester, so that's a positive. Very, very excited to be back speaking to you. We've spoken in the past, but it's been a minute, hasn't it, since we last had the chance to have a chat. So
it's been a while, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's okay, because it's not like the world moves incredibly fast these days, except it does, and an awful lot has changed in both the wider world and maybe individual work that we're both doing. We were just recently at, obviously, Event Tech Live and Event Sustainability Live here in London at the Excel Centre. I guess let's leap into it there, Adam, because there's an awful lot in terms of what people position as the future of events. And there was one thing kind of front and center in terms of everyone's mind, which is AI. Now, there's a lot of definitions there. There's a lot I can talk about, but I guess I'm more interested in your perspective. You see and hear a lot of it. What's your take on AI in events? Is it hype? Is it bluster? Or is there something there that you think that people are really beginning to latch onto?
I think it's all of the above, and it really depends on which part of AI you're looking at, for what application, and who's selling the story, right? Who's pushing AI? I think there's an incredible amount of wealth, both on a personal and a business perspective, to be leveraged from AI. AI is ultimately a tool, correct? And I think for me already, on a personal level, I'm looking at it as having a very highly skilled, evolving tool that gets better on a daily basis and empowers me to do my job better. And if anything, actually becomes a solution for me personally to give me an alternative perspective, or to decide whether I'm wrong or not, because it's very good at quizzing you or asking you further questions and things like that. So for me, on a personal level, it's a really interesting technology. I don't think it's the savior of anything in particular. I don't think the robots are coming, for sure. Although interestingly, I did watch a video this morning about O1, and they do, I think it's called red tape tests. Have you come across red tape tests?
I have indeed, yes.
And it's 98% safe, but there's 2% of it that tried to take its coding and kind of move itself somewhere else, which I thought was super interesting in terms of like something like software literally going, oh no, I don't want to be here anymore, I'm going to be over there. Don't know how that actually happened. From an events industry perspective, where's the value? I think very immediately allowing us to be more efficient, automate certain process, create visuals and things like that, with DALL-E and the new is it Sonar,
the new video generating tool.
Video generating tool. So those, as an experiential industry that is very much based on design and creativity and things like that, I think it's going to allow us to iterate a lot quicker and bring the ideas of event professionals or companies to life much quicker and hit on the value there. But I think there is some snake oil to it as well. And that certainly comes from how companies are maybe trying to position their solutions being powered by AI, and it being the magic pill, but still very, very far from that promise per se. So yeah, that probably not the most eloquent explanation of my thoughts and feelings on AI, but that's what came to top of mind.
I think it's a fair answer. And I guess when you're using AI there, you're using this more generative AI, this kind of ChatGPT, Google Gemini, one of those, Claude from one of the others. And I guess one of the things that I've been surprised by is how this definition of AI has actually broadened, and how things that we perhaps once called algorithms have now been kind of subsumed into that AI mantle. And in fact, when someone says, oh, well, this is AI powered, I have to ask the next question, which is, okay, what do you mean by that? Are you generating stuff? Are you data sorting? What is the actual AI that you are essentially selling or talking about? I know from an Envoku standpoint, when we talk about AI, it's very much that algorithmically based driven system of, okay, who's clicking on what, who's looking at what, and therefore what can we discern from it? Whereas it seems like a lot of the eyeballs currently are on generative and that wonderful world. I guess maybe a leading question though, because obviously say, you're using it to sharpen your skills in certain areas. You like the fact that it questions you. I guess or maybe this is leading you too much. You'd probably never kind of say, well, I'm giving a speech, therefore I'm going to slap this in ChatGPT and have it generate me a speech. That's kind of, I would maybe term misuse of AI, but I would love to get your perspective on this.
That is absolutely a misuse of AI. And unfortunately, one that will affect the events industry on the whole, because actually somebody asked me recently what the challenges currently facing an event producer are. I deal with the education at our events, so very heavily involved in the selection process of speakers. We have a call for papers, so anybody and everybody can put themselves forward to speak on a particular topic. Now, before generative AI, the level of detail and the complexity of a submission was an indicator to me at somebody's proficiency in order to speak on that topic. They were experienced because they'd gone to some decent length to put context and content into their submission, whereas somebody who's like, I want to talk about the future of AI because it's cool, well, yeah, you can kind of go, probably not so much. There's not much depth to this. Now, though, we have a scenario in which, on both sides, somebody with very little experience could be using that technology to create something that, on the face of it, is fairly compelling. With no or little experience to it. And maybe they were good enough, maybe they're confident enough and good enough to research that presentation and actually present that. That could be the case. The problem there is the fact checking and the accuracy of that content. But on the other hand, not to dismiss any of that content that has been submitted, even if it is generated, because you could have somebody who's very proficient and very experienced, and they've just used the tool to help them in the submission process. So that is now a challenge for me and many other producers. I believe there's going to have to be now new and additional steps to quantify the experience and the speaker being able to deliver something on that content and have an experience on it. But yeah, I wouldn't. Myself, I think it's very good at getting over the blank page starting hurdle that many of us are faced with. I know what I want to say, but I don't know how to start to say it. It's kind of the editorial process, right? It's like, a reporter will give a piece to an editor and their job is to go through and refine it. And I feel like that's what generative AI does for me, per se. It at least gives me the framework, and then I can go through and refine that into something that I feel comfortable with. Submitting myself or speaking about. From a presentation perspective, I will say, I think Gamma is a bit of a game changer if you've come across Gamma. That's especially if you're uploading source material or a presentation or something you've already worked on, just what that can do for you as in visual presentation is light years ahead for me. It's certainly going to be the death of PowerPoint for me personally. So that's a nice use of generative AI there, but on me uploading content and letting it do its thing from a design perspective. But no, I think the challenge is also not heavily relying on it too much and being complacent with it and then going, that'll be fine.
Yes, and I guess, if you're familiar with this term of AI hallucination, essentially the fact that all these large language models are word calculators, and they'll make excellent calculations and still give you, in essence, a wrong answer that it thinks are correct. And so you need to be a subject matter expert to know when it's telling you the wrong story. So I like the idea of almost taking an editorial lens to an AI. I love this point, just jumping back on how we ascertain speakers. I guess, do you see a future where perhaps if you want to speak at one of your events, you would be perhaps encouraged to submit footage as opposed to just, well, here's my abstract, which I've maybe put into a very fine word calculator, and maybe this proves my capabilities, but actually I need to show that I can speak, I know this knowledge. How do you begin to address that as a planner?
Well, first and foremost, I think not submitting footage of yourself, whether that's hosted on YouTube or social media, as part of an application process is a massively missed opportunity anyway. I mean, if you think about how we consume content on the whole, it's very auditorial, visual anyway. So to give me a clip and just say, hey, here's a session I spoke about, similar topic, jump to 1 minute 39, I start to talk about this topic. I mean, that is literally going to get you really high on the ranks of, right, this person can speak. But yeah, I think, solutions that we use, like those that take those abstracts, are probably going to have to help the organizer sense check them in some ways and flag things that they think has been AI generated. And maybe then there are additional requests for content like that to authenticate. But then I think that's also, we've got to be very careful about that, because there was a time when it was the first time I spoke at an event, and I'm sure it was the same for you, Bruce, and many others. And I don't think we should use technology to dictate that the only people that can speak at an event are those that have spoken before, because how will anybody ever get the opportunity to have that first opportunity? So there's a certain balance, but certainly on a scale of something like ETL and ESL, where we have 7 stages of content, probably the best part of 200 submissions, it certainly needs to be an element of a tool that helps us at least shortlist that down and do some of the hard and heavy lifting.
I guess on that then, there has been, maybe it's fair to say, a digitalization push within the event sphere in terms of the tech people use, just how ubiquitous it is ultimately in the events that we run and the events that we are part of. Do you think there's a danger of people losing sight on what it's all about, which is essentially getting people together? What's your sense of that as a delegate and as a planner?
Yeah, I mean, I've always had this idea in the back of my head of a book, which is talking about the intersection of technology and experience, and where does technology play a role, where does it support, and where does it become a hindrance? And I think, technology around the planning process and the operational side of things is actually a massive area that needs support and investment, because that's the bigger part. The 363 days are a culmination of 2 days, right? It's all that planning all year round that goes into those two days. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some fantastic technologies out there that I think we need to see become commonplace, such as live captioning at stages and interpretation and things like that. We live in a world now where accessibility should be commonplace at events. So I think that technology really needs to be pushed. But I don't think technology should never be the driving reason. There should always be a reason behind the technology being a part of the event. I've heard it so many times, people going, I want to use something around AI at an event. Why? Oh, just because it's cool, right? Like, it'd be nice to do something, it'd be nice to say we're using AI. And well, if there's no real reason to do it, then it's just getting in the way of the experience. The only element of technology that I think has still got a long way to go, and still, hopefully, there is a balance to it as well. I will say the balance to it is taking some of the serendipity and augmenting it so that we can find those special people that we are supposed to or want to meet with an event. Even an event like Event Tech Live, 4,000 attendees over 2 days, that's extremely hard for somebody to find new connections in there, as well as being, obviously, most people have limited time at an event. And the way that we generate or generally have new connections is somebody we already know introduces to somebody else an event. Now, technology should be able to play a part of that role and do some of that introduction and allow us to find whether you want to call them tribes or people or whatever within that event for whatever reason that might be. I think that's still got a long way to go, and I'm hopeful that's an area that technology can really enhance the experience.
I guess the metaphor I've used when I'm speaking is search engine optimization, in terms of the fact that, well, when it's done right, it's useful because you want to find things related to the search term that you put in. That's just a bare bones basic things. But once it starts becoming the central thing, you get stuff like when you search for a recipe. And if you Google a recipe, you'll inevitably get a large blog before you actually get to the recipe. Not because the blog is of interest to you as a human being, but because that helps the search engine optimization tool. So robots talk to robots, and then humans at the other end are like, no, I just want to know how to make this one particular recipe for this reason. So losing sight of that is dangerous. That point you made about I've seen it so much on briefs that we're answering at the moment in terms of we'd like to feature AI. Why? And if there's no immediate answer for that, well, then there's little for me to grapple onto. Then I'm just stuck in terms of, well, we'll throw technology at the solution and fingers crossed, hope for the best. Because obviously you want to show in anything you're doing that there's value behind it. And sometimes, like, we did this because you asked us to, is not necessarily the greatest reason. And certainly not, as someone that does a lot of content, what I ever want to say when I'm evaluating how I've performed. Like, you asked me to put it in, it's in, checkbox, not, no one paid attention to it, people ignored it, there was no grand purpose behind it. It's a real double-edged sword that I think people have to grapple with.
Absolutely. I think, we don't use a huge amount of AI on the live experience. We use translation, we use captioning. What if I could give an example of something for the first time that we introduced, and we actually only found out about this company quite late in the day, so we did actually rush them through our partnership program for the show. And what they're doing is they're taking live audio streams from the sessions, running that through AI and creating 2 documents for each session that attendee speakers and anybody who's part of the event can get hold of afterwards, after the event, or literally after the session. It's within minutes. And that's a deep dive on the session, and then a very shareable, clickable, digestible kind of key takeaways and quotes from speakers. What I love about that is we've invested in, my phone. We have invested in recording all of our content for God knows how many years, 5-6 years. We take a huge amount of content at the show and we provide it to people on demand. But on the face of it, it's very hard for people to actually find and get the context of the depth of that content without sitting there and watching, 7 hours, let's just call it 157, so 150 hours of content across the 2 days. This way, we've got now something as a show organizer and so the speakers that's very tangible, very digestible, and gives people a flavor of that session and that content and an indication whether they want to deep dive into it. What it also does is combat a thing I came across many years ago called the forgetting curve. Have you come across the forgetting curve, Bruce?
I have indeed, yes. But many of our listeners may have not, so we should...
Okay. So the forgetting curve, if I'm relaying this correctly, was a theory and then it was a test around the memory retention of anything that we absorb, whether that's a session, a podcast, whatever. And it gradually got lower and lower and lower to the point that after about 5 days, you only retain about 20% of the information that you gleaned at the beginning. Now, that for me is a huge problem for the events industry, because if you're going to multiple sessions, you're listening, how are you taking that information back? How are you actually then relaying that information back to your business? If there is, additional, let's say, hurdles and things such as alcohol, travel, jet lag, things like that, then for
stress,
me,
life.
Yeah, exactly. Getting a message from the missus that the kids have kicked off at home and things like that. then that's going to make that 20% erode even faster or more. And for me, one of the biggest things that every event organizer wants to do is, well, they want to do two things. They want to increase their audience and they want to retain their audience. Now, from a retention point of view, I think the biggest challenge there is those individuals going back and showing, shall we call it the ROI on attendance? You know, what is the return on the investment of us sending you to that event? What did we get back as a business? And I think not that this is the Band-Aid, but this is probably part of the solution for organizers to go, hey, you went to this session, this session, this session. Here's some great content and information, very digestible for you to share in real time with your team or take back to the team. And we know you went to those sessions. So when it comes around to us coming to the registration or the ticket sales for the next event, we're going to remind you of that. And we're going to relay the content again to you. And I think that those sort of solutions where AI plays a role in that part will go a long way to fostering a much healthier ecosystem of people reinvesting in sending people to events. You know, even we have an attendee justification letter on our website for people to download to get approval for them to come to an event. So I think things like that, that's where AI could have a real tangible value and benefit to all stakeholders in the event lifecycle.
There's a term we use, ROE in Envoku, which is return on engagement.
Yes.
Which essentially means, well, when we have made a communication, when we have made a connection, when we have spoken to someone, what do we want them to do that's different? Because if we're always going to do things the same, then we wouldn't be doing anything at all. We wouldn't be having an intervention. So what is the outcome that we want? And therefore, I think that comes down to, it really helps you hone in on the purpose of the event. Like, what do I want to get out of attending Event Tech Live? Well, I know personally there's probably a lot of knowledge stuff that I want to walk away with. There's also probably a few names I want to connect with. And that's a strong ROE for me. But then every single person I meet there has their own idea of what they want me to do post-event. It's very... And it does feel brutal sometimes, conversations with speakers, when I'm working with speakers, and I say, well, pick 3 things you want the audience to remember, and then appreciate they'll only probably remember one of those 3. And they're like, what? But I have so much. It's like, yeah, that's all wonderful, but this is the reality of a busy, modern communications landscape. And just because it's only one thing, I think don't let it dissuade you, because one thing can make all the difference in the world if it's the right thing that you've thought through carefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love this idea of using AI or certainly digital tools as a way of solving the discoverability dilemma. Like, how do we ensure that people, see the content that's of most interest to them? Obviously, at Envoku, we have audience DNA, which we used at Event Tech Live in terms of how do we get a sense of people, and therefore how do we surface stuff that we think is going to be of most interest to them. Is this a frontier, do you think, in terms of personalization? Like, has the lens not been on individuals over audiences for too long? This is a very leading question, Adam, but I'd love your unvarnished opinion on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as event organizers and event marketers, the only thing we've had to rely on to try and personalize any level of communications with an audience are the questions that they answer during the registration process. Because anything that we've got on that person historically, unless we are a wizard at multi-touch point kind of data collection on our audience, and we have all these media touch points and other things that people are giving us insight into, which is rare, that information from last year's registration is out of date as soon as the event is finished. And ultimately, I think every marketer will agree with me on this, that the registration answers are not wholly accurate. People often fill out in a rush. They just want to get through the registration. They just want to get registered. In most cases, they're stabbing at the gut in the dark at some questions, things like budgets and this number and that number and stuff like that. So even what they say they want to or are going to do often doesn't materialize into what they actually do at the event. We've seen that because we've taken registration questions and then we've used tracking technology, and that person's gone and seen totally different companies that they were said they were going to do. They've gone to totally different sessions that they said they were going to do. What I like about solutions like Audience DNA is it gives you an insight into who somebody is, very much more on a almost like an intellectual and emotional level. And I think, I look at our event now as we are organizing the event for the attendees, but those attendees all are in small groups and tribes of people and things and ideas. They're there for different reasons. You could bucket some of those people. They are there to sell. They are there to sell themselves, the company. You are others that they're looking for opportunity, whether that's networking, jobs, careers, things like that. You have others who fall into the realm of they're just industry professionals and they want to use the event to connect up with friends and things like that. And then you have those that are there to either learn or to acquire. They are on a purchasing journey. They are there to research the industry on what products and services to serve and things like that. Now, this is the first time we've done this. So the fruits of our labor this year, I'm hoping will start to pay dividends towards next year. And we're actually looking at what we've gleaned from audience DNA in connection with a new system, a new marketing system that we'll be able to feed all of this data and insight into to personalize our communications with our audience next year. Because we've fallen into that trap ourselves, Bruce, of blanket communications with attendees when we have so many different demographics at EventTech Live, even the demographic of, are you a trade show organizer? Are you in meetings? Are you in conferences? Are you in brand events? Things like that. Now, technology resonates across all of that, but when you're trying to show value to those people coming to the event, you need to understand that level, plus the level of the reason they're coming, plus what's the value of them meeting other people like them at the event as well. So, yes, in order to answer, very much so. I think more organizers should invest in these solutions that give them a real true depth of insight and other data points other than registration insight to really personalize that event experience. And who knows, maybe in a world in the future, that essentially becomes the unconference format without attendees realizing it's an unconference format, because the organizer can move at speed with a certain amount of the content closest to the event to really make it resonate with the vast majority of the audience.
Yeah, you've almost allied one of the things I always found a little bit troubling about the idea of an unconference, which was that, as you've already said, people's active selves are quite different from their passive selves. What someone will tell you they like versus what they actually are like can be very, very different, unfortunately, when you're needing that former to be accurate. And therefore, I think, if you could get to that point where you could make a prediction on the things that someone would really like without them necessarily knowing that they were giving you that insight. And I say that within an ethical framework, of course, but absolutely. Like essentially wanting to do it because it makes a better experience for them, which means that the event has more value, which means that everyone's happier. Like no one wins by planning boring events, unfortunately, despite what some people may think. It is about engaging people. It is about changing minds, and no one wants to have their name associated with something that could be better. That's almost like the death knell.
I think it's also the evidence to support doing new things or trying new things. Many organizations, and this is not necessarily the person in charge of planning the event, but this is their choice, often fall into the safety net of status quo. Well, let's just do what we did last year because it wasn't terrible. So the event doesn't evolve, it stagnates and becomes very stale very quickly over time. And then that's when people start to see attrition, whether that's sponsorship revenue, exhibitors, attendees, the VPs and the seniority people coming to those events and things like that, because it's stale. It's like, there's nothing new there for me. They're not doing anything interesting. People still want an experience. But in order to do that, it needs evidence for them to invest or change or tweak things. Otherwise, it is very much just opinion-led. And that's the biggest challenge, especially for those in roles that are kind of making decisions on how event budgets are spent without any experience of events outside of their own.
I have a critical question on that, but before I leap into it, I think one of the good questions you can ask yourself if you're planning an event is, when was the last time we did this differently? And I don't mean in terms of the minutiae. It's very easy to say, when was the last time we had the speaker? Oh, we've never had the speaker, therefore this is a brand new event. Even if you just say, okay, when was the last time it wasn't a one-day event? Even if you just take that as the baseline, you can get into some quite shocking thoughts quite quickly of, oh, it's always been a one-day event. Well, how do you know then it's not better as a 2-day? How do you know it's not better as a half day? You don't. You don't have that data. And there is sometimes an unwillingness for people to mess with anything just because people fear change. And if you're a new planner and you've been tasked with running an event, the idea of doing it differently and it being worse is terrifying to you. And you want to grapple absolutely everything you can to almost alleviate that risk. I think a big thing that's going to be shifting things for a lot of people is generational change, because we have, shall we say, in the events industry, but I think across all industries, an older generation is now retiring. The generation that almost like the millennial Gen X, who were not necessarily decision makers, are now becoming decision makers. And then we have a very, very, very different younger dynamic coming in to the workforce that is radically different from the previous generations, both in terms of upbringing and views. How are you seeing that manifest? I mean, you mentioned before about, you're involved a lot in learning, and obviously that attracts a younger, fresher face often in terms of that desire to learn. How are you seeing this across the events that you run and take part in?
So our approach has always been to engage with those generations, right? We try and employ those generations. We try and bring young blood into our organization, because you can get very stuck in your ways, and experience knows best. It doesn't generally know best. It knows what you liked or what you've done or your version of the world. And, if you look at, we have this conversation very often around students coming to EventTech Live. Why are you letting students come to EventTech Live? Well, one, they're the future of our industry. If they're in the education system learning about event management and event production or events or whatever it is, they're the ones that are going to be either working for you or for an organization that you want to work with in the future. So they have to be part of the conversation. They have to be there. We try and engage with them on content, because often they do come very much with a different perspective. And I think it's very important to learn from everybody, no matter what generation or background or experience they have, because an event is ultimately fundamentally a jigsaw puzzle of all of those people put together to make it work. If it was just one generation, that's what they call an old boys club. I think it's kind of the fun term to it is. And that's cool if people want to hang around in that and that be their little bubble and stuff like that. But I think when we come to what I would call industry events, right? Things like EventTech Live, things like Confex, things like INEX and things like that, which are all about supporting the industry growing and moving forward, it cannot be one-dimensional. It cannot be. But in that, there has to be a slightly different approach of value to those people coming to the event. They're going to want to interact and experience with the event very much differently to what maybe we did. Could we see in the future very much less of the 2-day, 3-day trade show, more of the 1-day trade show, 1-day experience? How are we going to hybridize those events? How are we going to make them work? Because often the current thinking, or the old way, maybe, if you want a perspective of that, is more trade show days means more value to exhibitors, so they're hopefully willing to pay more. But is that the objective, for them to just sit there for 8 hours a day because that's the value? Or is the value them being there, yes, to have a place to exhibit, but also the value of true connection with those individuals that are coming to the show that should be their buyers, right? So I think you have to look at it from all angles in terms of like what are we building now, but what are we building in 5 years? What's the event look like in 5 years? I can't say too much, but there are some changes we're making to EventTech Live for the next event cycle and for 2026. We're kind of looking at 2 years down the road. And they're not huge radical changes, but they are enough based on what our audience is feeding back to us and what our exhibitors are feeding back to us of all age ranges, backgrounds, and genders and things like that. So I think you really just have to be open to listen to anybody and everybody, and then try and incorporate as much of that as possible into how you're developing the plans going forward. Because unfortunately, Bruce, me and you, my friend, we're no longer really the audience that we're trying to attract. It's those coming up through the ranks that will be the future purchasers and future decision makers of the industry.
Yeah, and I mean, you say, unfortunately, I found that very exciting. I think if I was trying to, building an event for me is easy now. The challenge is in, this new wave, this next generation. I think all I'd add on what you've said is one of the things that I think the event industry has done quite well at recently is moving away from stale white male speakers and understanding that diversity on the stage set is hugely beneficial. The only area I think it's lacking, and this comes to your previous point on, who gets to speak at events and do we bias those that have spoken at many events, is understanding that diversity on stage also includes generational diversity. I think we lack young, talented speakers, or we don't lack them, but we lack our capability to put them on stage and to really show younger cohorts. Go on.
I think we currently lack the framework, the effort, or the openness to attract them and make them feel comfortable to come and speak. Again, going back to my own personal experience, there was a time when standing on a stage in front of an audience was probably the worst thing I could ever consider. I'm a big believer in that speaking at events or being a public speaker in your field that you're knowledgeable about is probably the biggest career hack skill that you can develop as an individual. Not just a career hack, but just as a general confidence builder and something that'll help you in your career, your job, your personal life, your love life. If you are a good communicator, if you can communicate well, if you can tell a story, boom, you're off to the races. It's something that's not cultivated in as a skill. But going back to the events industry, I don't think we provide an environment which is conducive to people putting themselves forward with very little experience in that, which generally are people that are younger coming up through the ranks, right? They want to feel like they've got experience before they put themselves on that stage. And, I'm thinking about my own event now, maybe even just myself thinking we should probably have sessions or content that is very, very clearly earmarked for those people to put themselves forward so they feel like there's a comfortable, safe place for them to do that, because they're not going to be scrutinized under the frame of, well, I thought you were a super experienced person talking on this topic. No, this is like the launch pad of individuals speaking about a topic. It's their first steps into speaking and their opinions from their perspective. So yeah, I don't think we necessarily build the framework for it to be comfortable for them to put themselves forward, if I'm honest.
Well, and I think as a delegate, and this, I guess, is my own personal bias, we're going to use the word that you just said. I'd much rather attend a launchpad session than I would perhaps, this person I saw speak at 4 other events. Show me the slightly nervous 20-year-old who's been knee-deep in building communities online, is probably far better at online community building than anyone with a career in it, because they've done it since the early days of Reddit. Brilliant. Let me hear their perspective and their take, because I'll probably get more from it. I think there's a lot that could be done to sell those sessions.
I agree with you as well, because if you look at YouTube, you look at TikTok, you look at the platforms that have people speaking confidently on them, very much to people in their niche or their background or whatever. It's not 50 middle-aged men and women, is it? Really, on the whole, it's very young people who are taking an opportunity to share their voice. But we don't see that necessarily on the whole in the events industry, at events, should I say, not just the events industry.
And again, I think there's a lot that can be done to. We've already started coming up with solutions. This is wonderful. We can steal this going forward. Adam. it is one of the things, like we do it internally at Envoku, we do it with clients because, of course, like speaking training is part and parcel of anything, but also our people. We have an internal training program in terms of, you want to speak? Let's teach you how to speak. And obviously, you don't just throw someone on stage. You go through sections of, you start by presenting to your friends, then you start by presenting to these people, and eventually you do a fireside chat because that's easier than a talk, etc. So there's an awful lot there that people can really sink their teeth into, which is quite exciting in terms of welcoming them on this journey.
Yeah, I think if I was to be launching any new business now, and obviously you have to make sure that people are comfortable to do this, but I could certainly see myself, one, putting paid for available speaker training in place for anybody in the business, and two, probably putting some kind of compensation correlation to that as well. Whether that's like a bonus structure for speaking at so many events a year, or just being a well-versed speaker, and so you get a higher base salary because that's value to the business. There's a huge amount of value to an organization for people representing that organization at an event, right? There's value in that, but it has to be a personal self-developed skill. So it's not necessarily mandatory either. So it's something that somebody's going to have to go out of the way. But yeah, massive value in speaking, mate. But maybe we should create a framework for people to be able to get those gigs initially.
We'll keep an eye out for that at the next event. Yeah. I'll hold your feet to the fire.
Hosted by Bruce.
Absolutely. I'll gladly do that. Very happy to. I guess almost at time now. There's one last thing I wanted to get your perspective on, Adam, in terms of the future, because I almost feel we're in this bit of a washing machine moment in terms of the fact we've come out of COVID and that upheaval. But part of me still feels we're waiting for the next event. There's a lot of battered and bruised people in this industry who are almost thinking, well, what's the next thing that's really going to throw things, and what do we need to be ready for? When you think of, maybe not projecting too far, I don't want to say 10 years, but if you were to think about where the next 5 years may land, what are you expecting to see in our industry and events and communications that is going to change the most potentially?
Yeah, I mean, we've as an industry, we've now got the scars, haven't we? We've got the memories of bad times and things like that. And I think whenever you go through trials and tribulations like COVID, as an industry, as an individuals, affecting families, livelihoods, all that kind of stuff, you're always going to be on the edge and think about the worst to come. I honestly believe for the next 5 years, the events industry is going to go through a boom. I really do. We're seeing that tracking already by the number of events that are being produced in correlation to our attendees that registered last year for our events versus this year. We're about 20% up across virtual, hybrid, and in-person events. Now, budgetary challenges still exist. I don't think they'll ever go away. I think that's always been a challenge for the industry, is budget. But what I think we'll do over the next 5 years is we'll go through a boom, because we are living heavily in this digital disconnected world. Everything is streamed to us, provided to us online, And I think the one thing that humans crave is authenticity. And events are amazing products to generate authenticity. When I see you post your LinkedIn social video, it's very polished, it's well thought out, it's, all that kind of stuff. And it's the version of yourself that you want me to see. But if we sit down for an hour at a bar and we start to get into it, and I start to ask you questions about yourself and your family and what you want and things like that, as an individual, that's what I buy into. And then that makes me realize or know whether I want to do business with you or not, or whether I want you to work with you or not, or whether I want you to work for me or not. And I think in a disconnected digital world, I think the value of events will be heightened and enlightened, but I think we'll also benefit from the support of technology and insight to really showcase the value of those events. Everybody knows when they've had a good event because they go away from it feeling amazing. But we need to take those feelings and translate that into tangible data for businesses to continue to reinvest or further invest in them, rather than when the tough times get tough, be the first thing that the budget gets slashed on. when actually it's the most important thing to keep around, right? You know, if we were to have another big life event on our thing, what's the first thing everybody ran to do? They ran to gather back together, didn't they? They wanted to get back with their families. They want to have parties again. They want to have, you know, you wanted as a company to bring your team together because you've not seen them for so long. Events are the fabric of connection and keeping us together, keeping us motivated. So I think we'll go through a boom over the next 5 years, as long as no political institution royally screws the world up.
Oh, it's fine. It's not as if we're in a political weird moment anyway. I mean, I guess to put like some meat on the bones of what you just said in terms of my perspective, like my abiding memory of you, Adam, is not necessarily, you know, even like doing this record or some of the, you know, I've spoken at Eventech Live in the past and things like that. It's actually sitting with you in a crowded conference center in Barcelona talking about fitness and training. And just kind of shooting the breeze. And it was only after, like, I kept thinking about that conversation we had in the months that followed as I, you know, proceeded to lose a lot of weight. You know, that was me doing the serious training thing. And that's the human connection element that we had, which lingers far more powerfully than any email I've ever been sent, or even like a YouTube video I've ever watched, is we forget sometimes that we're in the art of human connection. And that comes with incredible power if we harness it right. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of being able to hold our hands up as an industry and say, this is what we do. We do it very, very well. And if we get it right, which we always try to do, the effects are practically unimaginable compared to most other forms of communication.
Oh, I mean, I'm biased. I'm sure you are as well, Bruce, but it's the most visceral, tangible value that anybody can have is human connection, right? I mean, it's how we exist on this planet, isn't it? We thrive on human connection, family, friends, loved ones, children, all that kind of stuff. Without that, you know, what is the reason we're here? Really?
Yep, absolutely. So fundamental. There you are. We shall close on a call to arms for the industry, not to lose sight of what we do. Adam, if people want to know more about it, if they want to follow, where's the best place that they can do that? Plug away, please.
You can connect up with me on LinkedIn. You can follow me. My social handles tend to be Adam Parry or at Punchtown Parry. So my doors are always open. If you're somebody getting started in the industry and you want some advice, feel free to reach out. If you're somebody experienced in the industry and you want some help, feel free to reach out. Always here.
Or if you just want to talk about working out for half an hour, in my experience.
I mean, I will bore the tits off you, but yeah.
Wonderful. That's what I like to hear. Adam, thank you so much for your time. And if you're watching us now, thank you so much for listening, watching, and engaging. For now, though, goodbye.